Hello, students. Welcome to lecture number 10. Let's start out by talking about some risk management in international shipping and in international transactions, shall we? Well, if you're taking the NASBITE test someday, these are the things that you should know: marine insurance, transportation options, packaging, etc. Much of this we've talked about, and we'll skip over that. Marine insurance, well, obviously, what type of insurance you need in transit, cargo insurance slash marine insurance, will of course depend on what Incoterm you have agreed with your buyer. We've covered this a number of times, but let's just do it one more time. If I'm selling X works from my plant, well, I'm not paying for insurance or destination terminal charges, etc. However, if I'm selling CIP, you'll see that category. I go down to insurance, then that is my responsibility. So again, what the extent of insurance we need is contingent upon what we have agreed with our contract of sale with our customer. We've also covered that you usually get 110% for the value of the cargo. So you don't just pay for 100%, unfortunately. You pay for 110%. Cost is relatively minimal, a lot of times less than 1% of the value of the cargo. Let's skip this. We've covered. We'll skip this. Covered. Transportation options and documents. Obviously, you may recall bill of lading or waybill. So when I'm taking my goods to the transportation method, ship, airplane, rail, whatever, whoever is transporting it will give me, I'm going to call it a receipt, basically, but it's a bill of lading or whatnot that I can then take and prove that I own the cargo on that shipment, right? You need to, once it's gone, you need to be able to prove that it's yours. And then usually transmit that to the buyer in our instances in international transactions so they can take this and claim the cargo on the other end. It's almost like a document of title, if you will. If you were to sell your car, one would write title on the back and exchange it to another person. Well, this, we've given our cargo, our goods to someone else, a transporter, so we have to have proof whose it is and who can pick it up, despite the method. So you see, I won't go through these and read them for you, but I'll just make the distinction. For example, what would be called an airway bill would by airplane be the equivalent of an ocean shipment's ocean bill of lading, just slightly different terminology. All right, here's a key concept. Remember, when I'm exporting, this is a document that we need is to, well, I'll tell you what, we don't even need that in this lecture. I don't like that the NASBITE's put it in there. They do a great job, but I don't think we need that one that's already been spoken about. So there are, please watch this YouTube video, and it talks about types of bill of lading. So, for example, if there's a non-negotiable straight bill of lading, it just goes straight to the person I put on there, if you will. They have to pick it up, or maybe I'm shipping it to myself or my affiliate in another country. However, a negotiable shipper's bill of lading, they can take it and transfer it to a third party. So then they might sell it on to someone else to later be able to claim it at the port of import. All right, now we're jumping into some contract terms. Again, this is jumbled up a bit, and I apologize, but we're talking about our transport documents now. When we're actually talking about sales, the first thing you're going to say is, oh, wait a minute, I am selling between different countries. So how in the heaven's name can I know whose law applies? Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. Number one, if your buyer will agree, you might try to designate in the sale contract whether it's an exception to their purchase order, a sales order acknowledgement, etc., or they agree to it in their purchase order, you might designate your. So if I'm shipping from the US, I might try to get my customer to say the applicable laws are the US. Well, obviously, a lot of international customers not only have leverage, but have no preference for or agreeing with US law with which they may not be familiar. Understanding this a number of years ago, the UN uh, passed a convention, um, and basically it literally sets up a whole set of rules on if the buyer does this, the seller's responsible for this, vice versa. And it's a great, fair rule of interpretation. So you might, with your customer, both agree, because this is voluntary. This is not law that's imposed as of right. But if you don't put that in there, say you as the seller don't put in your contract, US law applies. Your customer doesn't say law of France applies. You've said it out, left it out. Well, then these countries that are signatories to this, many, many countries, these voluntary will automatically apply to the contract interpretation. Here's some of the types of things that are in there, which are significant. And again, if you don't already have it in your sales contract, that one uh, country's laws apply. So, for example, what is offer? What is acceptance? When does that become applicable? Well, why is that important? Let's say I'm selling gold to someone internationally, and I offer to sell it on day one. On day three, gold goes up by 50%, theoretically. And my seller's like, great, I've got this sale. I'm going to accept it. Well, the you're going to want to be able to prove, well, they haven't accepted it yet. So I was able to revoke it once I saw it went up 50% after that, or else you would lose all sorts of money. How do you make subsequent modifications to the contract? What's the place and date for payment? What are the remedies? I don't ship on time. What can the buyer do? The buyer doesn't pay me on time. What are my remedies to be able to go after them, et cetera, et cetera? So these are a great set of rules for international commerce. Now, one thing to know is these rules apply for international sale of goods between private businesses, but not sales to consumers or leases, etc. What does consumers mean? The easiest way from a legal perspective to understand that is if you are selling directly to someone in their household, that's often a consumer sale. If I go to McDonald's and buy a hamburger, I'm a consumer. That's a consumer sale. If I go to Walmart and buy a product, I'm a consumer and I'm using it for my household, taking home whatever from Walmart. Conversely, if I am a supplier that sells shelving to Walmart, that is, you're not consumers, it's business to business. So these rules could indeed apply. Next, there are other conventions that uh, countries will come up with, much to the chagrin of those of we who put cargo on airplanes. There's the Warsaw Convention, which limits liability for air carriers, Montreal Convention from 99, MC 99, etc. So it basically allows air carriers to limit their liability. So that will is implicit in your transport with a uh, air transporter, cargo transporter, even if it's not specifically in there, this will generally apply. Let's talk about some other general contract terms and conditions. There's also a thing that in your sales terms and likely the customer's purchase order terms when they send a purchase to you, there'll be a thing called a force majeure. And courts for hundreds of years literally have um, recognize the concept that there's some things that are just beyond our control. If I'm going to ship to you, but then a hurricane sinks the ship, well, then obviously that's something that I probably shouldn't have liability for a late shipment. It's a factor beyond my control. I can resend it later. There's a war that breaks out in such and such country and the bombing and it's destroyed. Again, that is a factor that's beyond my control, and you probably won't be able to sue me because I have a force majeure clause in my sale that says these factors that are well beyond my uh, control shouldn't cause harm to me, if you will. I get another chance. Other things to worry about are things like what happens if there is a dispute? Do we have litigation? A, B, if so, where is the litigation to occur? The seller's country might be international, or the buyer's, or I'm sorry, our, in this hypothetical, we're the sellers. Our country where we send from or the buyer's country. The buyer's going to say, you have next to nothing to do with this. I bought it, I use it here, et cetera, et cetera. So that is often a dispute if you have not agreed as to the applicable country of litigation. Many companies will say litigation is public. We want privacy. We don't want our problems out in the public. So let's look at alternative dispute resolution. There are two that are well known, and the one is arbitration. And that basically what you do is you give someone who's not a judge, it's not public, but they act like a judge, and you both do a mini trial. They will come to resolution. It's legally enforceable. Another part is mediation, and that is will that will be where we can voluntarily go in front of a third party that will try to get us to reach a voluntary resolution or settlement. So that's known as mediation. Next, uh, international, we've talked about contract terms, things to consider in your contract, sale contract. Obviously, and some of this we talked about, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. But if I'm shipping internationally, there's certain packaging and shipping issues that I want to worry about. My cargo is going to be handled many times. It may be loaded onto truck, then onto rail, and then onto a ship, and on the other end, unloaded back onto rail, and then onto a truck, for example. And it'll be packed in this multimodal package or transport carton. But again, so obviously, so obvious, you have to um, make sure that it is secure for have a stronger cardboard or plastic cartons, often plastic, and that's problematic because it's more costly for us. And there are in the EU, for example, there are recycling concerns that we have to might be responsible for, but you just have to consider these things when you're transporting, for example, across an ocean. Most ocean shipments are palletized. In one of our lectures, we're going to talk about different containers. It might be this one, but we'll get to it. Let's see. If you're not uh, palletized, it might be called floor loading. For example, I've got a big thing that doesn't fit. We might put it in here. Some put it in cases of crates, etc. Let's see. If I'm going to do a month's ocean shipping, obviously I want to have my products packaged so that they are waterproof and don't have damage. Um, let's jump to the next one. So when I am shipping, shippers long ago figured out, well, if I just ship by weight, then my huge container is my container ship is going to carry, 1,000 containers of featherweight things, and I'll make $100 on the shipment. Conversely, If you just if they just consider volume, then same thing. Someone might be put a whole bunch of heavy things within that volume, and the shipping company's going to make no money, next to no money on that shipping. So basically, we have called the calculating the cube concept. I'll just let you look at the math, but we'll look at this next. Uh, these are air shipments as an example, and they will do a calculation that will have both the weight as well as the size of the cubes that are used. So it'll be two major dimensions that one will use on this. So if you're trying to figure out how your shipper is trying to calculate your freight, it's as simple and as problematic and difficult as that. Okay. Um, let's skip that. I'll let you read that. We've talked about protective packaging before, waterproofing. We've covered that. I'm sorry for going so fast, but a lot of this is redundant. So I don't want to waste your time again. We know about freight forwarders, we know about insurance companies, we know about import brokers on the other side. If you have a good freight forwarder, they can cover everything from picking it up to insurance to everything. They're basically your um, uh, just a travel agent for freight, if you will. So they can take care of all these things in one fell swoop as long as you give them a good description of what's going to be sending. Obviously, they need to know harmonized code numbers. They'll work on the tariffs. Sometimes we can make advanced bookings. Let's say that we're shipping monthly. We might get a good rate through our freight forwarder with the transportation companies by get a monthly rate. We're guaranteed we're going to ship this much each month, and we might get a reduced rate, for example. Now, let's switch from our selling to our purchasing. Very few companies that manufacture, and frankly, a lot that distribute, are able to do it completely domestically in the country where they are. Some might argue, well, there's a lot of agricultural products, true, but let's say you're manufacturing home goods, anything, then you often have to import at least part of the inputs into your manufacturing. So these are some on task 3.5 on the NASBITE test, NASBITE certification. They talk about these are the type of things you should know when you are importing your purchases to go in your manufacturing, or frankly, if you're just distributing. Let's go through those. First, what are some of the advantages? Well, I can get certain things at a much lower cost and in different countries than I might here. Um, I might be able to have alternative suppliers. Here's a good thing, and you probably studied this maybe in manufacturing or anyway, it's in logistics in some of your courses, but essentially, it's nice to have available multiple suppliers for the same thing. They call them alternative supplier here. Why? Well, if I have three suppliers of the same good, I have a certain amount of leverage one against the other. And so I can say, well, I can get it over here for a lower price. Second, let's say that there are pandemic concerns in one certain part of the world, and I can't even get this product. Having multiple suppliers, hopefully I can increase my orders on those suppliers and still get my products and not be stymied or stopped from manufacture. What what currency are you using might be an interesting thing. If the dollar is very strong, I might have a tougher or a better time buying stuff or a worse time buying stuff based on the relative currency in the country from where I am buying. Those are some advantages. What are some disadvantages? Well, I'll go through just a few. This obviously tariffs and the duties that we pay from the tariffs. We're going to have to pay that. And so let's say, for example, I can buy an input from a domestic manufacturer, wherever I am, and it costs me $100 per unit, but I can buy it from China is a good example for $80 per unit. Well, as long as my tariff is below, that 20% margin, I'm okay. But as soon as the duty that you're paid goes above that 20%, it actually benefits me to pay to get it domestically. Increased shipping, handling, transportation, foreign currency fluctuations. I think these are all relatively self evident. Quality. If this is a new supplier for you, it's prudent to have someone from your organization or a certifying body or somewhere in the area where your vendor slash supplier is to check for the quality, to test their manufacturing processes, to ensure you're getting a good quality product. Number two, obviously, supply long lead times for your supply chain if it's international, relatively long. Intellectual property, we do that another week. We want to get into disputes again. Do we do your country? Do we do their countries, etc.? Cultural. Um, I unfortunately I am coming from a U.S. perspective. Fortunately, I've been in international business for 30 plus years, so I've seen differences in different countries. And it is almost always beneficial to have a personal relationship with your primary suppliers and sellers for that matter, to know that there's trust going both ways. It's not just a contract you're sending out. You trust the people behind the contracts and to foster those relationships. This isn't going into Walmart to buy a pack of gum and walking out. This is working with another company, its personnel for maybe decades. And so having that personal involvement, understanding them culturally, these are important factors to understand when sourcing internationally. We've talked about high context and low context culture, so I won't reiterate that now. I just put these hypertext links in the lecture materials for you on where to find these resources for understanding anything from strategies to customs to understanding local mores, etc. Trade agreements. Well, of course, we understand when I'm happening to be recording this at this moment, that's a huge thing for US based businesses anyway, and any countries that do business with the US. Don't want to get into it politically, but obviously, if you have an existing trade agreement, for example, the U.S. has or had I don't know politically where that's gone, but we've had a very strong trade agreement with Singapore. And so the duties, for example, will be minimal or zero buying from Singapore as opposed to buying from China. So these are some things to consider. T's and C's. All right, we've already talked about number one, what terms and conditions apply. So we already talked about the UN Convention on International Sale of Goods. Now, here is the chronology. Make one change here. The chronology, obviously, in order is my customer's going to send an RFQ, a request for quote. I'm going to quote. I'm going to do that by sending them a pro forma invoice. It's going to look like my final invoice, but it just shows this is what I'm going to charge you if you purchase our goods, this is what I'm going to charge you or services. Then they're going to send a purchase order to you. Sometimes in here, you will send a sales order acknowledgement, a pretty good practice. And then you ship the goods and you invoice. So I'm not going to talk right now about whose terms and conditions apply. The person that sent the purchase order or the person that sent the quote and then the sales order acknowledgement. Whole legal quandary there. Really interesting topic, but if you take my business law course, we get into that. But generally, whomever's terms and conditions of sale to which we are referring, there are at least this list of things that should be in there. Let me go over the highlighted. obviously, let's on the front of the purchase order, if you will, generally, obviously, which goods, when do they need to be there? Are there especially handling, labeling requirements? What's the method of shipment? Who pays for insurance? What is the price? In what currency? How long till they're going to pay you, et cetera, et cetera. So in your terms and conditions of sale, make sure you have all of these. And when you receive a purchase order, there should be someone doing a due diligence. And if there's terms with which you don't agree, obviously you should say, we can fulfill the order, but we object to term 3, 4, 7, and 8. So if you agree, we'll go ahead and manufacture and ship this to you. It becomes a negotiation at that point. Well, quality considerations, we've covered those. You'll see this ISO 9000, 9001 is a big thing. International Standards Organization. Different products have different standards. Anyone who's purchased a lamp in the US, for example, will see the Underwriters Laboratory mark on that. Everyone's going to see CE or CEN throughout the EU, and that means your product has been analyzed and certified, usually for safety purposes, by these independent bodies. Okay, we've gone over ISO 9000 previously. Here are just a couple of more. Again, ISO, International Standards Organization. There's a number, but here's just some numbers depending on what your customer may require, what management may require. I'm not sure if this number is still, the 2015 number is still current, but the 14,000 would relate to environmental management systems. Okay. The next 27001 would be IT security, for example. So when you're running your company, and yes, if you have great management and you're making your tons of money, which most companies are really just working so hard to stay in business and have a healthy margin, but not imposing undue costs on their customers. But so often these type of standards will come from your customer. We require that you, as our supplier, have ISO 9001, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing uh, obviously all online ordering and payment, we require you to have ISO, 27001, et cetera. So that's usually how these arise. They're often customer-driven requirements. All right, landed cost. I think we've already talked about that again, but let me just pull it up. When I am importing or exporting, in this instance, we're talking about importing, I'm going to start with the cost, but I'm going to have to add all these things: packaging, freight forwarder, ocean transport, etc. So this is just an example of additional costs. Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you next week.